I'm just looking across the room and realizing how far away you are, so if I'm yelling at you, I apologize. But I'd like to welcome everybody to our 103rd meeting of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Just a reminder that this meeting is being televised today. Today, pursuant to the Standing Order 81-4, we are going to commence our study on the main estimates of 2018-19. Vote 1 under the Office of the Coordinator Status of Women, as well as Vote 5 under the Office of the Coordinator Status of Women referred to the committee on April 17th of 2018. For this reason, we are pleased to have with us the Honourable Marianne Monsef, the Minister of Status of Women, with us today. She is joined by Nancy Gardner, Senior Director, General Women's Program and Regional Operations, and Annick Lapointe, Chief Financial Officer and Executive Director, Corporate Services. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Minister, for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and it is a privilege to be on this unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin peoples with you, and on this particularly important day. On May 24th, 1918, I'm sure that it seemed that the government of the day had finally recognized that women had a role to play in the government and the governance of this country. But there were more milestones to come. It was another 12 years before the first woman was appointed to the Canadian Senate, thanks to the famous 5. It was 22 more years before women in Quebec could vote in provincial elections. Another 42 years, 1960, before Indigenous women and men on reserves could vote in federal elections. And it was another 97 years, 2015, before Canada saw its first gender-balanced cabinet. Since then, you may notice that a lot of work's been done. A lot of work can be attributed to governments, but most of it, I think, is attributed to those whose tireless advocacy got governments like ours to listen. I'm here to give you a summary of some of the work that's being done, and happy to take any questions afterwards. Let's start with the main estimates. The main estimates reflect this government's commitment to breaking down barriers to gender equality and to develop better strategies to better prevent violence against women and girls. Our $62.3 million allocation in the 2018-19 estimates represents a nearly 60% increase in our overall spending over the previous year. This increase is very important to us because our role has grown tremendously in the past year or two, and because we need to grow to keep up with the new demands on Status of Women Canada. There's an increased level, as you know, of public focus on the need to end gender bias in all parts of our society. We want and need to build on this momentum. We will be using the increase in funds to improve the capacity at Status of Women Canada to handle new demands coming from Cabinet, Parliament, parliamentary committees, Canadians, profit, and the nonprofit sector, frankly. Our new responsibilities on GBA Plus, for example, involve a great deal of coordination with other federal departments and agencies, as well as interactions with provincial, territorial, municipal governments. In many instances, issues stretch across many department lines, and we don't always own a particular file. So more effort is involved in making sure that the proper inputs are considered. We also need to strengthen our public policy capacity to establish the permanent corporate structures necessary to meet the needs of our clients and to deliver on our ambitious government priorities. On gender-based violence, a large part of our increase will directly address the high demand to focus more of our attention and resources on gender-based violence. We're funding many different projects on this issue at local, regional, and national levels, as well as in partnership with Indigenous leaders living on and off reserve. The new gender-based violence program, this is the funding envelope, helps organizations in the development and implementation of promising practices in support of survivors of gender-based violence and their families, including underserved populations. We're also making adjustments to the way that we support organizations with potential extensions of project funding from 3 up to 5 years, an increase in grants of up to $1 million, and an expansion of eligible groups to include think tanks, organized labor, post-secondary institutions, and others. We're also providing funding for gender-based violence research, data analysis, and surveys to give us a deeper understanding of the true scope of the challenge. On GBA Plus, as you know, All measures in Budget 2018 were subject to a GBA Plus analysis, and the budget also included a new gender results framework to guide future decision-making while measuring our progress in creating an economy that works for everyone. New GBA Plus legislation will be introduced this fall to enshrine gender budgeting within the federal budget-making process. We will continue improving the use of GBA Plus across the federal organizations we're responsible for so that an intersectional gendered lens is carefully applied to the government's decision-making policies, programs, and services. We will also host a national roundtable on GBA Plus later this year to share the results and best practices of these efforts. An important part of this initiative is making sure that federal employees have the necessary training to carry out GBA Plus. I'm pleased to report that to date, we have been able to build on GBA Plus skills of over 100,000 public servants, parliamentarians, and staff. I thank all of you around this room who have taken the course and have your certificates to prove it. On women's economic security, I know another issue that this committee has studied extensively. We are also focusing, like you, on addressing the persistent barriers that create economic insecurity for far too many Canadian women every day. The statistics are all too familiar. The stories are familiar to this group as well, as I know you've studied it. To address this, and as part of our efforts where Status of Women specifically is leading, earlier this month in Alberta, I announced $10 million in funding for projects to tackle the root causes of economic insecurity for women by improving their access to jobs and careers. For example, we are funding a project to encourage more women to get involved in aviation. Only 5% of pilots, by the way, are women. Another helps to remove barriers to the job market for those fleeing domestic violence. And there are also projects aimed at increasing women's participation in STEM fields. We also recognize that we are in an era of reconciliation. We need to do business differently, but we also need to work in collaboration, respectful collaborations, and partnerships with the First Peoples of this land. And so last night, it was an honor for me to join with colleagues and bring together the first Indigenous Women's Circle to advise Status of Women Canada directly. We recognize that in this era of reconciliation, women hold the key to a lot of the solutions that we need to find. We know that there's a lot of strength and resiliency in those communities, and their wisdom will help guide the way for us, as this is the most important relationship for our government. You also are aware that Canada is leading the G7 this year, and gender-based analysis and that intersectional gendered lens is woven through all the important conversations that ministers will have, that leaders will have in Charlevoix in 2 weeks, and that's an important milestone. Mainstreaming gender into this agenda has never happened before, and I'm grateful to the members of the Gender Equality Advisory Council, Women 7, Youth 7, Labour 7, who came together along with other ministerial colleagues to ensure that the work of the G7 is going to address inequality and to focus on equality as a driver for growth. As we all are, I'm sure, I'm proud that the legacy of those who fought for us to have the right to vote 100 years ago is in the hands of many across the country, including those of us who have the privilege of serving as parliamentarians. And I'm proud of our government's efforts to honor their legacy by continuing to build on the work that they've done and clearly all the work that remains to be seen. I also want to appreciate and personally thank each and every single one of you for the work that you've done on this committee, but I also know that you get tapped to do work on other committees because gender equality, of course, is not just an issue that Status of Women, neither the committee or the agency can do alone. So many thanks for the time you're offering me to be here with you today. 2 great women from Status of Women Canada are here to provide any technical briefings that this group may wish. And Madam Chair, I'm happy to take any questions colleagues may have.
Excellent, thank you. And we're going to begin our first round. It's 7 minutes each with Mr. Fraser. Mr. Fraser, 7 minutes.
No, I think
no,
it's
golly
Miss
gee,
Jordan,
I don't want you to start. Bernadette Jordan, Miss Jordan, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. I guess I'm going to start with, as a member of Parliament for a large rural riding, and we recently came back from the UN where we had the International Status of Women meetings, and the theme this year was women and girls in the rural economy. And I'm just wondering what our government is doing to help women, rural women particularly, break down the barriers, because there are many barriers for rural women particularly to participate in the economy.
Thank you for that question, Chair. The Commission on the Status of Women, at which many colleagues around this table were present, I'm thankful for that participation, was an important opportunity to share our best practices as Canadians on the work that is being done to further support women and girls living in rural and remote communities, but also to learn from other countries. I think we went there with a lot of pride in what we're doing, but also humility, knowing we have more work to do. In our case, in Canada, when we talk about rural communities, we also need to include remote communities. And in the Canadian context, the Indigenous communities issues is also part of this. So firstly, the work that's being done to ensure that we apply that intersectional gendered lens to all our policies also includes a rural lens being applied. So I think that's really important, so that that perspective is understood at the onset of the policy-making process and programs. The second piece that I think is important was the investment in rural broadband. I have a mixed rural riding, a mixed rural urban riding, and having that cellular and internet access is not just important in the economic realities that we know can be consequences of not having it, but it's also important for access to resources like services. In the case of social issues like gender-based violence, we know that, and I was touring some rural communities over the past summer, hearing from women's organizations, we know that those organizations, the women organizations, are doing more than just supporting gender-based violence survivors and victims. Their employment agencies, their youth council reps, they do all sorts of work, and so we know through our gender-based violence program, for example, that ensuring that those who serve underrepresented groups, like those living in rural communities, need to be prioritized, and we are prioritizing them. So these are just some examples of the work that we're doing, but as I said, that work continues. Our rural identity and our rural communities are essential to the well-being of Canada as a whole, especially women and girls in those communities.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to shift gears a bit here. And one of the things we've heard a lot about, and we heard about it at the UN as well, is engaging men and boys in the conversation on gender-based violence. The problem that I've heard from groups in our communities is that women have fought so long and so hard for funding for their organizations, and now we're funding men's organizations. So I'm just wondering if you'd like to address that.
That's an excellent question. Thank you. And as you know, we did receive funding separately from the funding we've received for women's organizations to engage Canadians in a conversation about how men and boys want to be and can be agents for positive change in the conversation around gender equality. We know that the social norms and the deeply entrenched systemic realities aren't just hurting women and girls, they're also hurting our sons and our fathers and brothers. And so this isn't about dividing the two. I think it's really important that we recognize that when we support women and girls, when we talk about how men can and are agents for agents for positive change, it's also good for all Canadians. So the money that we've set aside for the engagement with men and boys, which will take place through the leadership of the parliamentary secretary I'm blessed to work with, Terry, will begin this summer. The funding is separate and aside from the money that we are supporting women's organizations with. I've worked with the YWCA. I understand that we're not there yet in fully supporting women's organizations, and so this isn't about taking anything away from them. And the women's movement can have that reassurance from me. Again, as we talk about all the ways that funding is required to advance this work, it's also important to be mindful of all the things that don't cost money. Men are great role models to other boys and other men, and our individual conduct as women and men and gender diverse peoples is actually just as important as the work that we need to do that requires financial investments.
Thank you. How much time?
2.5 minutes.
Oh, good. Okay, and another question I have, Minister, is with regards to sexual assaults on university campuses or on post-secondary. We know that this is a major problem. I believe I saw a statistic that 40% of rapes in Canada happen on campuses. What's being done to address, is there anything with Status of Women is funding to address this problem? You know, it's a real concern for young people going off to university. It's a concern for society in general that 40% is totally unacceptable. So I'm just wondering if you'd like to address that.
Thank you for that question. We know that over 40% of the reported cases of sexual violence are coming from students. And so it is absolutely an issue, not just for the students and the overall working and learning environment it creates, but also for parents who expect that when their kids go off to this important stage in life that they're safe. And so we are working with provinces and territories through new investments in Budget 2018 with $5.5 million to come up with a coordinated strategy across post-secondary institutions to address this really important challenge and a significant barrier to our economy, but also to the well-being of our communities. Our gender-based violence strategy as a whole, the first of its kind, also works to address some of these systemic barriers, but we know that there are student unions, for example, across the country who have solutions. I've met with administrators across the country who want to be part of the solution, and working with them in partnership is going to be a critical component of our success.
Thank you.
You've got about 20 seconds.
Thank you very much.
Okay, fantastic. And we're now going to move on for 7 minutes to Rachel Harder.
Thank you. Minister, you came to Canada from Iran. Now, you understand that area of our world and some of the challenges that women face there. I've been to northern Iraq, I've been to Jordan, and I've talked with women and girls there. And I've seen the atrocities that they face in that area. Now, ISIS is targeting Yazidi women in particular, but that's not all. But this group is definitely under persecution. And so in June 2016, the UN actually declared what's taking place there a genocide. And so you'll recall that the Conservative members of the House brought forward a motion calling on the government to bring Yazidi women and girls over to Canada so that they could find a place of refuge here. That motion was unanimously consented. Now, it's reported that the city in which the majority of these women and girls have resettled is in the city of Toronto. Interestingly enough, in Toronto is where a known ISIS terrorist also resides by the name of Abu Huzaifa. Now, he resides there, and we're talking about a man who openly boasts about having beheaded individuals who are being held captive. So I'm wondering if you can tell us what your government is doing with regards to this in order to protect vulnerable Yazidi women and girls who are living next door,
Pam?
down the street, within the same city.
1 moment, please, Pam.
Thank you, Chair. I have a point of order. We have the minister here to discuss estimates as they reflect status of women. And while I'm sure she could give us a wonderful answer on this issue, because our government has been doing quite a number of things on this issue, and I welcome the member to come to the Committee of the Whole this evening when the Minister of Immigration will be taking questions on this. But I feel strongly that when we have the Minister for the Status of Women here, we should be dealing with the estimates and the issues that are reflective of status of women.
I appreciate that. I have actually, prior to this committee, had confirmed with our clerk as well as people within this. And when you're dealing with main estimates, you're dealing with anything under the government umbrella, not just specifically with status of women.
So that's new. So the clerk is saying that when a minister comes to committee, they're open to questions on anything the government is doing?
So I'm just going to remind Ms. Harder, if you could just bring this back to the estimates. It can be anything whole of government, but if you would bring it back to a portion of that. Okay?
Minister, you stated in your opening remarks that you are putting in place promising practices with regards to cutting back on violence against women and girls. How does putting Yazidi survivors of violence and intrepidation and selling them into sexual slavery, how is putting these women and girls next door to an ISIS terrorist who is boasting about it, how is that advocating for their safety and well-being?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to respond to this question, and thank you for the question. So there are a few pieces here that I want to respond to. You're right. I was born an Afghan refugee in Iran, and so the compassion that I've seen from Canadians from all walks of life devoted to ensuring that refugees come to Canada to welcoming communities and that the supports are there continues to inspire me. I think that's an important part of who we are as Canadians, and it's to be lauded. With respect to ISIS fighters, Canada's police and security agencies work to the highest professional standards every single day to keep Canadians safe. That's true in this case that you're referring to and every other case. With respect to terrorists returning to Canada.
Sorry, thank you.
Our priority is to
so
investigate.
With regards to my question,
Order.
I'm asking.
Order. The chair, the floor. And I'm sorry, but they speak in, and this is the one thing with this, the time does go to the questionnaire. That is protocol on this. So I recognize we don't want interruptions, but at the same time, we want to make sure that it can come back. Yes, Pam.
I want to go back to the point of order because there's nothing in the estimates, just a moment please, there's nothing in the estimates for the status of women about public safety. There's nothing in here about the programs that the government has in place that are supporting Yazidi women and girls, which are many, the many women and girls who have come to Canada who are receiving trauma support, who are receiving support as refugees in Canada. All of those would be covered in the estimates with immigration. So I'm confused as to how estimates for status of women, which has absolutely nothing to do with this, can be part of what we're doing.
In all respect, I believe I hear what you're saying, so please don't think that I don't. But I have been advised that it's main estimates. We are looking at main estimates as well. Main estimates can look at all government spending, so that's point one. Point two that I'd like to make on this, when we bring it back, and we've been talking about women and abuse and all of those things, if it can be brought back to that, studies that we have just completed over 1 year ago, then we can find some sort of correlation between the two. So I'll ask all panelists, any questionnaires, to make sure that it does come back to estimates and government spending, and then we can go forward from there. Thank you.
For me, though, estimates from any department can be dealt with at status of women, because I would have thought estimates to deal with immigration would be dealt with at the Immigration Committee.
We are referring to the votes that are from us. I will suspend for 1 moment, please.
Sorry, is that a conversation for the whole committee?
No, it's not. Thank you. No, no. We're getting clarification. 1 moment, please. Thank you. We're suspending for 4 minutes. Okay, I'm just going to remind everybody, as long as it comes back to the department, so we can look at things as GBA plus So whether it's GBA plus when we're looking at immigration, that can be seen as the whole of government in that part. If we're looking at the funding programs, anything that comes from this department, and GBA plus was born in this department, that can be something that we can look at. Any of the status of women when it comes to the programming, as well as the violence of violence against women. So what we're going to be looking at is if these questions are pertinent, and the story may be long, but if it gets back to a question that has to do with something what the status of women has dealt with, especially in the last 2.5 years, which we have dealt with these issues, then I will allow the question to stand. Yes, Pam.
So, sorry, just to clarify, so anything pretty much anything at all that has nothing to do with the estimates?
The question that she asked had to do with violence against women, and that question stands. That is the ruling of the chair. That question will stand because it is under violence against young women and girls. That we finished that study. I will allow that question to stand.
Okay.
Thank you for the question, and I think it's interesting that this is.
I have the floor.
And maybe, Madam Chair, could you clarify how much time I have to respond to a question? Is it 35 seconds? Is it a minute? Because I would love to provide responses. It's why I'm here.
Okay. I'm going to give the floor back. The floor is to the questionnaire. The person who was asking the question gets the floor. It is unlike in the House of Commons where it's 30 seconds, 35 seconds. Each questionnaire gets 7 minutes provided to them for their line of questioning. If there are questions that she feels are going off-site, then I would ask in a very more an appropriate way that we are allowed to cut the person off, as that would be yourself or any of the members of your department, so that we can get back to the line of questioning, because that is the questionnaires' time. Thank you. And that's back to Rachel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Minister and her caucus have shown us that this matter, studying Yazidi women and girls and having them brought into Canada, and the impact that ISIS fighters living next door to them is having on them, it's been shown that this is not something that is of concern to you. You've demonstrated that. At a prior committee meeting, members of your caucus have demonstrated that. Your government has demonstrated that. Now, the problem with this is that I'm very concerned because these are survivors of traumatic experiences. Now, my question is simple, and I've asked it before, but I wasn't given an answer. So perhaps you could take 30 seconds and give me an adequate answer today. And that is, was GBA Plus applied when this government decided to bring more than 60 ISIS fighters back into Canada and put them next door or down the street or within the same proximity as these women and girls who are victims of incredible atrocities at the hands of ISIS?
Thank you for the question. I think it's interesting that this is coming from the member opposite when there was a vote in the House of Commons to further support settlement services for Yazidi women. The member opposite, and indeed the Conservative Party, voted against it. During the 10 years that the Conservatives had in the previous administrations, 3 Yazidi women
Thank you very much for your time. It's interesting because you asked for the time that you should be going after, and we said 30 seconds, and you continue to give a non-answer. So I'm clearly seeing your commitment to this. Now, Minister, it's clear that your government did not do a GBA Plus. Had you, I would have expected a different outcome. And so here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing no gender-based...
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, this is a democratic process. And we have the Minister today. And I think that questions are being asked and that some time should be allocated to the Minister to respond. If we don't like the response, I don't think it's appropriate to insult or criticize the response. But moreover, I think a bit of respect should be given to the Minister in trying to answer the question.
Okay.
And not to sort of insinuate comments that are unnecessary.
I appreciate your ideas. What we
Time I come to this committee,
and I appreciate their
I've been to other committees before, and I'm becoming a bit disgusted with seeing how things are going.
Okay.
So
well,
I would like you, Madam Chair,
I hope that's not
Madam Chair, I would like you, Madam Chair, to take a bit control of this situation on how the comments and the flow
Well,
the questioning is going. Thank you.
I really appreciate your time, but please do not question my chairship. I do not appreciate that because I try to be extremely fair. And as I've indicated before, I was put in this position by the Liberal government, not by my choice. And I will remind you that once again. So the bottom line is I will allow a time up to 30 seconds. If the minister does not begin to answer that question within 30 seconds, I will then allow the person to interrupt. But please do not question my chairship once again. Thank you.
Here's what I'm hearing from the minister. I'm hearing that no GBA Plus was done, no consultations were done with these women and girls and how it might impact them to bring ISIS militants into Canada, and this government has absolutely no understanding with regards to the trauma that these women have faced, being brutalized at the hands of these ISIS militants who are now being brought into Canada and so-called de-radicalized. I'm hearing that this government, by choice, is siding with ISIS militants who commit these grave atrocities instead of standing up and speaking out on behalf of these survivors. And that, Minister, is an absolute shame. Now, here's my next question. The Immigration Committee recently heard from officials with regards to the settlement of Yazidis and other victims of ISIS. Now, it turns out that according to reports that only 5 Yazidi survivors have access to individualized trauma and counselling in Canada. It turns out that they have little access to translation and interpretation services, and it turns out that almost no access has been given to them for medical treatment, specialized trauma care, or mental health services. Now, in contrast, the men who brutalize these women, or women like them, are being welcomed into Canada and put into a so-called de-radicalization program where they're given full access to everything Canadian society has to offer. In fact, according to Minister Goodale, they're receiving mental health services and trauma care as a part of this process. Minister, why is it more important for your government to protect ISIS militants and to make sure that they have access to such services rather than standing up for the victims of these brutalizers and making sure that they have the basic care that they require in order to reintegrate into Canada and start a new life?
Chair, I take issue with all of that. A GBA Plus was conducted, as is with all decisions our government makes. It's a GBA Plus that should have been conducted when the previous government decided to cut healthcare to refugees like Yazidi women. We did support $14 million in funding for settlement, income support, mental health services to address these most vulnerable refugees. Unfortunately, the member opposite voted against that. We are also working to ensure that ISIS fighters are brought to justice. The previous government brought in 60 of these folks, zero were convicted or charged.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now going to move on to Ms. Quash.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister and to her officials for being with her this afternoon to answer our questions. It's the first time I've been to this committee. I was discussing with some local organizations in my riding and also at the national level to see how they were experiencing their relationship with Status of Women Canada. And the agreement periods have moved from 3 to 5 years, indeed, so that they can take better advantage of that. However, some organizations saying that it's very difficult to apply for grants, and you have to partner with other organizations on the ground. Sometimes projects have to be reapplied for, and it can take such a long time that people are not motivated to continue. Can the minister guarantee that the changes that will be made for the administrative program for women so that organizations can receive funding for basic functioning expenses and not have to constantly reapply and relaunch pilot projects, because everything that has to do with feminism as such should be considered, or so that it could be considered in the decision making?
Very much for your question and for all the work that you do to advance equality in the country and beyond. You're right, the sustainability of the women's movement is critical to the sustainability of all our efforts to ensure that long after our work as politicians has wrapped up, the women's organizations have what they need to continue to move forward on our agendas. And you're right, we are making changes to the way that we fund women's organizations. I'll use the example of the gender-based violence funding envelope we announced in January of this year. It's a $20 million envelope, and it is up to 5 years now. But what we decided to do to ease the access of the application for these projects for the women's organizations based on what they asked for was don't write the whole application right now. That takes time and resources. Instead, give us your idea, give us a concept. If it's approved, we will give you up to $30,000 to further develop the project. We're also more than doubling the funding for women's organizations so that there's actually more to support these important leaders across the country in their work. And as you know, a significant part of our efforts since we formed government is forming better relationships with provinces and territories. I met with my provincial and territorial counterparts last fall. I'll be meeting with them again this fall. This is an item on our agenda. It's a shared priority for all of us because especially in the context of Me Too, and every hashtag that increases the rate of survivors seeking supports, we know that the demand on these organizations too has gone up. So part of the supplementary estimates includes further funding for these organizations and ensuring that those who have willingness to be part of the solution, like unions, for example, they asked to be eligible for these funds and now they are.
Merci. Je vais juste essayer d'avoir un peu.
Thank you. I'd just like to have a bit more clarification in terms of the time that it takes to get access to these subsidies. There is a lot of time that has to be spent on it, and it takes a lot of working, and the Status of Women Canada wants to have some kind of sharing. It gives the impression that the department has already decided how they're going to allocate these amounts, and often it's the same organizations who receive funding, and on the front lines we're in a rural riding, and that's our impression. So I'll move on to the next question. You can respond to that a little bit after, but there is also a gap in service for organizations who are offering services to young girls and women. So people who are in transition towards adulthood from the ages of 14 to 24. So there's a project to work in my riding in the Montérégie to help women from disadvantaged areas who might have committed some offenses. So it's the 14 to 24-year-old bracket. Status of Women Canada at first had refused the project because they're under 18, but there's a gap in services for those young women. They don't know where to turn to. They're not adults yet. And so Status of Women Canada and its vision to fight against violence against women, will you be able to adjust to that?
I want to clarify that we do not turn down projects supporting girls. We, in fact, encourage them. Part of the issue you've raised around different organizations don't always have access to these dollars is because the previous government cut down several regional shops representing Status of Women Canada on the ground. So these organizations wouldn't otherwise have access to knowing that there's a funding application happening right now. This is how you apply for it. Here are the questions and the answers that you may want to consider in the writing. So we've opened up regional offices to address that accessibility barrier. The time spent is an important one on these projects, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, we are asking organizations to spend less time, and once their concept is approved, we're giving them funds to be able to further develop the project. The gaps in services will continue, and I think unless we start to do business differently. And we are. I heard these from women's organizations, and we also did a review of the women's program, the way we fund projects. And I just want to give you the 3 recommendations that came out of this review. The first was that we continue to fund projects that foster systemic change. The second was to increase efforts in knowledge sharing so that we're not just holding on to these best practices, we're sharing them with other communities. And the third was to enhance supports to funding recipients through the project lifecycle. So these are all issues we've taken into account, and we also have a sustainability envelope in the recent budget. It's $100 million focused on the sustainability of the organizations you speak of.
Thank you very much. We're now going to move off to Ms. Damoff for 7 minutes.
Chair, I'm just curious, will we get another round on this side, do you think?
I doubt it. Well, I don't know.
No, I know. I'll probably share my time with
Fantastic.
Mark
Just
Saray.
let us know.
The first question I have, Minister, is we heard testimony here in committee, and I also, I'm really proud that in my riding, Alvin Tedjo, who's a community activist and young father, has been advocating for years for a use it or lose it parental leave system, because we know from testimony that we've heard, as well as the organization that he heads, the major impact, positive impact that has on families. So I'm wondering if you could share with us from Budget 2018 how that use it and lose it parental leave will help Canadian families.
Thank you for the question. We know that those early days of a new life, being part of a family, are really critical for attachment reasons, for caregiving reasons, for the family to be able to transition to this new reality they find themselves in. And I've heard from many fathers who weren't able to be part of those early days how they wish that they had been. And I also hear from fathers who are new parents, those who are able to spend that time together with their newborn, how much they appreciate this important time. And in Budget 2018, we introduced a new EI parental sharing benefits for the Canadians, new Canadian parents. The use it or lose it methodology does apply. The idea here is to help families grow into their new roles and new realities, to provide those financial supports so that they can do that. But it's also to ensure that the responsibility for care work, which is often worn by women, is shared more equally across genders and across parents. And so what this new parental sharing benefit is also intended to do is to help address some of the wage gaps so that parents can choose who stays and who goes out and works, but also to, back to the role model conversations that I had. When fathers are seen to be providing that care work, that's a really important change in societal norms that's required to further enhance gender equality, and it's one way that individuals can be part of the change.
Thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Saray.
Thank you, Stamoff, and thank you, Madame la Présidente. And merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for the compassion that you have for women.
Committee's next study will be on women in politics. Previous studies, we've heard several testimonies on the increasing abuse of cyber violence in social media platforms, especially targeting women in politics. Madam Minister, can you comment on the main online or barriers that currently exist for women in politics?
Thank you. And on this important day, the 100th anniversary of some women receiving the right to vote, I think that question is particularly important. Yes, we've come a long way, but we also have so far to go. And each of you around this table who's gone through the process has a great deal of expertise in this area. So I'm very much looking forward to your study, and I'm very much looking forward to the recommendations, because I think our most important job in this place is to inspire the next generation of leaders to come and do the work that we've come here to continue. One of the ways, and for all the ways that I think the study is important, I know that women in politics experience different barriers. We've heard from so many of them. We know that there are barriers around care work. We know that there are barriers around financial access. We know there are barriers in lack of role models. Unless she can see her, she cannot be her. When little girls see women like those around this table in positions of power and influence, and I can tell you my 9-year-old niece certainly does, she thinks to herself, if she can do it, I can too. Which is why it is so important for each of us to be mindful of the fact that we are leaders and we are role models, and that little girls and boys and gender diverse individuals are looking up to us to lead by example. And it's why I was saddened and frankly disturbed to see a member of the Status of Women Committee take it upon themselves to send cyber and male violence to one of our colleagues around this table. That is not the way that public resources ought to be used. That is not the way that we are expected to behave as politicians. Sure, we can disagree without being disagreeable. Sure, we can have different ideologies, but the disrespect and the online violence that we perpetrate against one another actually sets all of us back. In terms of the work that is being done to further enhance women's leadership capacities, for the first, I will say we have a pot of money available to and announced last year to support Indigenous women's leadership. We're working with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to support a project or a series of projects with them. We've invested close to $20 million in supporting women's leadership capacities, including young women, because they are leading today and they have important ideas that need to be heard. All of that work is being done. Your study will be very much appreciated and very timely, frankly. But unless as individuals we lead by example, we are not going to advance the cause that brings us together around this committee table, which is improving the status of women in Canada.
30 seconds.
How much time? 30 seconds? Okay, my last question, Madam Minister. What has the government done to support women who are business women to expand their businesses and to contribute to the Canadian economy in terms of entrepreneurship for women?
$6.5 billion women entrepreneurship strategy was announced in budget 2018. It includes support for starting up, scaling up, having access to mentorship, and having access to new trade markets. And it will also, for those living in rural communities, you'll appreciate that through regional development agencies, we'll be able to better connect with the needs of individual communities and entrepreneurs who will create jobs for us.
Thank you very much. We are now going to go on to our second round. That's down to 5 minutes. Stephanie Kuski, you have your first 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I find it very rich that you bring up that when you yourself are from the party with numerous cases of sexual harassment in front of it, and we take offense of that actually as the Conservative members here. So, please watch your commentary in terms of what you're saying in regards to the actions of your own party. Thank you. Minister, I know that gender-based violence funding is very important for your government, and so I would like to know if you have a specific number or numbers as to the women and girls who've gone without food and shelter and have suffered significantly as a result of these resources, which I'm sure you had meant allocated for them, now being reallocated to those who are illegal border crossers.
Thank you, Chair. Resources that are supporting irregular immigrants are not being taken away from others. I want to clarify that. Gender-based violence funding is important to all Canadians, not just our government, which is why this recent budget more than doubled the funding for organizations to do this work. Sexual harassment, I appreciate you bringing that up. Bill C-65 has gone through several iterations, and it recognizes that sexual harassment and violence and discrimination is not particular to any one group. We know all parties are affected by this. We know all communities and cultures are affected by it. And so we are united in our efforts.
Thank you, Minister. Then I'm sure your members will abide by it once it is in effect. Ministre, le gouvernement fédéral a donné 74
You gave $74 million to Quebec to deal with the illegal migrants coming across the border. Do you know what the designated amount is specifically for women and girls?
in all our efforts is recognizing that, for example, in migration cases, women are particularly vulnerable. So ensuring that the supports they have are in line with their unique needs and realities has been taken into account. I also want to go back to the comment. When I talk about political violence, I'm not talking about sexual violence. There's a spectrum of violence that takes place. All I was saying, Madam Chair, is if we want to make this world better,
Thank you, Minister.
we all
Minister,
lead by example.
I would be interested to know, can you please inform the committee as to the GBA Plus process for the illegal border crossers? What GBA Plus process is being implemented and enforced for those who are illegally crossing our borders, please?
The GBA Plus process that our government applies to all policies and proposals that we consider is about 22 years old. It was on the books for the previous government. If they had used it, they would not have cut health care to refugees. They would have let in more than 3 Yazidi women who were in high need into this country.
Or illegally, like these border crossers are doing now?
And the work that we're doing to support irregular arrivals as well as all immigrants includes the application of that intersectional gendered lens. And we also want to ensure that the organizations that support them have the funding and the capacity to do that work. And of course, we're also working with our provincial counterparts to ensure that our efforts are in alignment.
Minister, in a November 28, 2017 article regarding correcting your birthplace on your citizenship documents, you were quoted as saying, "Just like everybody else, I'm waiting my turn." Based on this very quote, is it feasible to say that your very own family, your very own flesh and blood, would have suffered additional hardship and delay as a result
This is
of these
very
illegal border
personal
crossers?
Excuse me.
Point of order.
One moment, please. Do not interrupt, okay? I'm taking my ground on this one. Please make sure that it's relevant to the question and to the main estimates. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair, this is personal attacks on another member of Parliament.
Okay.
If she's going to focus on what's in the estimates, that's fine.
In a CBC article.
I know, and I've been called a supporter of a terrorist organization by someone over there too, but that doesn't mean we bring
will
it up
suspend.
here.
Thank you very much, Minister. No, excuse me. Thank you very, very much. We will suspend. We will change up our panels and begin again at 4:30. Thank you. If everybody could please take their seats, we are going to begin once again. If everybody could please take their seats, that'd be fantastic. I'm going to start by first, there was a notion made that when I suspended that I was not allowed to as the chair. As the chair, I have the authority to suspend when I wish, and that's just to the members of the Liberal Caucus. I have control and am allowed to suspend when I feel is necessary. Due to decorum, that is why I suspended, rather than calling out people on decorum. So I will take that ability to suspend when I need it, and please do not question the chair once again on why I suspended. Thank you. We're now going to begin. Well, he knows it was him. Don't worry. Don't worry. Decorum. Excuse me. Excuse me. Please. We are now coming back for our last hour. We now have both Nancy Gardner, thank you for remaining with us, as well as Annick Lapointe, and Lisa Smiley, who is part of our programming. And let me get your proper title here. I'm sorry if I put my glasses back on. Lisa, why don't you just tell us what your role is?
Sure. So I'm Director of Research, Planning, Evaluation, and Audit.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. We're now going to begin once again with a full round of questioning. We're going to start with our 7 minutes and go around. Sean Fraser, you have the first 7 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a reminder for anybody who's tuned in back home with the estimates before us, we have an opportunity as parliamentarians to scrutinize the spending of the government, and we've got the experts here to answer questions we have to make sure that that spending is being done in a sensible way. There's a few items I wanted to hone in on that are included in the estimates. The first, to build on one of the questions my colleague, Ms. Jordan, I believe, talked about with engaging men and boys. I saw that there's a line item in the estimates with $0.9 million. One of the things that we heard loud and clear during our committee study on eliminating gender-based violence against young women and girls was that in order to bring men and boys into the conversation, you have to go to where men and boys are talking. The ones who show up at the first week on campus for the sexual assault and consent seminar are not likely the ones you need to connect with. You need to break up the so-called locker room talk. How can you assure us that the funds you're actually allocating to encourage men and boys to promote gender equity in Canada is being spent in a way that's going to reach the men and boys who need it most?
Thank you for the question. It's an excellent point that you raise around going to the source in terms of you wanting to actually get information in terms of how to actually fix the problem. As the Minister mentioned, there is an amount in the budget that was identified for engaging men and boys, and that is exactly what's going to happen over the summer. There is going to be a process where Terry Duguid will be leading the process in terms of engagement and going to the sources to see what exactly are the things that are required for a men and boys strategy, figuring out from the source what are the types of programming, what are the types of resources, what are the types of issues that are being faced through men and boys that would help with this issue that we've got. So we're looking forward to that opportunity, I think, because it would actually give us the on-the-ground information that's required to actually develop the types of strategies that we need to develop that would meet those needs of men and boys and addressing the violence situations that we are talking about.
Excellent. So is it safe to say that this is perhaps the first tranche of funds that's actually going to identify strategies to solve the problem that could be followed up with further opportunities in future budgetary measures?
I think it's safe to say that this is the opportunity to figure out what exactly is the need and how we can address it. And depending on that information, we would then determine what exactly we would need to put in place to address those issues that have been identified.
Thank you very much. I wanted to move to another budget line item that I've seen here. There's about $10 million allocated in the estimates to support women's community organizations. We've heard loud and clear through multiple studies that find the people who are doing the good work, support them in doing it. So I'm encouraged to see that that advice seems to be taken. There's two challenges in particular that I wanted to raise with you. One involves the ability to use some of these funds towards the core operating expenses of a community-based organization. The second really deals with the length of time that these funding go for. We see time and time again really, really great projects have a 1-year term or a 2-year term, and when they prove themselves to be effective, the answer is, sorry, you got to come up with a completely new plan. Is this money going to be spent in a way that's actually going to allow women's organizations to do good work for the long term, and are they going to be able to help keep the lights on, so to speak, with the funding that's been made available?
Thank you for that question. I've worked a long time in terms of not-for-profit organizations and not with the status of women, but with other departments, and have seen that issue being raised, I'd say, across many sectors. The funding that has been announced is looking at sustainability of women's organizations, and I think that has been an issue that's been raised to the department over the long period of time that the department or the agency has been in existence. For these organizations, like you said, it's important for them to be able to actually have that solid base of support so they can do the work that they do on the ground. Sustainability, that's exactly what that's focusing on. They will have access to funds that will support their capacity. And as the Minister stated earlier, it's a longer term length of time for these projects to be in place, not the one-year project-based funding, but we're looking at over a period of 5 years. That would allow organizations to have that stability that they need to do the work that they do every day, as well as potentially applying for other types of program funding that look at project-based funding.
So I expect I only have time for perhaps one more question, maybe two if they're very brief. But one of the other line items that I see is $500,000 set aside to improve support for sexual assault crisis centers on campuses. We had a chapter of our gender-based violence study dedicated to the campus culture. The rape culture that permeates society, of women who are seeking to gain an education, yet face this barrier of a threat of sexual violence that absolutely astounded me when I heard of the risks that young women face who are entering colleges and universities. $500,000, frankly, doesn't seem like enough money to solve this problem. Can you give me some confidence that this is money that's going to, perhaps like the Men and Boys Initiative, going to help identify the problems and solutions, so with follow-up funding opportunities we can actually make the difference that we need to make?
So thank you again for that question. I have to say I am a little fearful, having started working at Status of Women with a daughter going to university in September, so you know a lot more information in this point. But that amount of money is for this fiscal year. The total amount for campus-based violence is $5.5 million over a period of time. So it's the very beginning part of the actual initiative. We'll be able to then, like the Minister talked about, work with our provinces and territories, work with our stakeholders that know this issue very, very well to determine what a strategy, a framework would look like for university and college campuses across the country. I think working with our partners is critical in this because those players are main contributors to actually working with the universities on the ground. But actually determining what a framework could look like is critical for us to have the right supports in place for those folks on campus.
Excellent. I've got about 30 seconds left, and I'll just take it to say thank you. The work that you do is incredibly valuable, and I appreciate what it's going to look like with the increased resources over the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Nancy, thanks for sharing your personal story as well. It's good to know that we're all in it together with parents. So I'm going to carry on now with Stephanie Kuzy for her 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, as a woman, I'm very excited to see that this year's budget, and of course, therefore, the estimates was in regards to women, since I am a woman and since I support women. I do. Thank you very much, colleague. However, I am very concerned, and I've stated this previously in this committee, in regards to the outcomes that these types of budgets have historically had. So in Australia, this type of budget was abandoned in 2014. In Austria, we saw a third-party auditor review this type of budget with no data coming out that women were in fact much better off. And in a study of several OECD countries, only half were shown to have some type of measurable improvement in the lives of women for their nations with these types of budgets that were implemented. And I asked this question to the Minister last time she was here, and it wasn't addressed at all. I guess as someone who is very proud to have managed million-dollar budgets for the government in my previous role as a management consular officer for missions abroad, and as someone who prides himself on having a Master's of Business Administration, I'm sure like many of my colleagues in the House who also have many designations, I'm wondering if you please can specifically identify the metrics by which this budget and I guess these specific portions relevant to the status of women will be measured, because I think that the Canadian public are very excited to see this budget, but they will need the evidence, the proof, and this government talks all the time about being a science-based government, a data-based government. What are the metrics that we can look for and the tools that will be used to see the positive outcomes, the benefit, the results for this budget, please?
Thank you for the. Oh, I was going to say thank you for the question. I was just going to start by saying that the budget outlined obviously many initiatives, including some specifically for status of women, and the programming piece. I think we've been pretty clear in terms of the outcomes for that type of programming specifically. The budget also raised the bar, I would say, on gender budgeting, and the focus on results is really clear. So the gender results framework is something that's going to guide the results of the measures that have been put into the budget. And I was just going to ask Lisa if she could speak to some of the specifics around that.
Of course. So as Nancy said, this budget released a gender results framework, and the intent of that framework was to articulate what we're trying to achieve on gender equality and how we're going to know we got there, what the measures of success are. So there were 6 pillars of the framework, and under those 6 pillars there were key indicators that we're going to pay attention to and monitor over time to see how successful we've been in achieving those goals. So those indicators are published in the budget, and those are those success measures that we will monitor.
But could you expand on what they are specifically, and if they are, for example, relative to what? I mean, we can certainly set our own objectives sort of relative to what is, or I guess I'm saying we can create sort of artificial numbers to make ourselves feel good, but how will we really know that this has had a positive impact on women and furthermore on society? So perhaps you could further outline those pillars for me, please.
I'd be very happy to, absolutely. So, for example, under the pillar of education and skills development, we've indicated in the framework that we want to see equal opportunities and diversified paths in education and skills development. For example, we want to see more diversified educational paths and career choices. And in terms of indicators we'll pay attention to, we want to look at the proportion of post-secondary qualification holders who are women by field of study and qualification type. The proportion of post-secondary students who are women by field of study and credential type. High school completion rate by gender and for underrepresented groups, including Indigenous peoples. We also want to see reduced gender gaps in reading and numeracy skills amongst youth, including Indigenous youth. And so we'll look at indicators like high school reading and mathematics test scores by gender, including those for Indigenous peoples. We'd like to see equal lifelong learning opportunities for adults. So we'll pay attention to indicators
Lisa,
like...
pardon me, are there numeric scores tied to those, or is it aspirational? Is it percentile? Like if the scores improve 30%, or we are aiming for a minimum 65% standard? I mean, that's just sort of a bare example. And I'm sorry, what was the first phrase you read at the beginning of your explanation, which is very detailed, and I'm appreciative of it. Sorry, just...
Sure. So the first thing that I had said was in terms of the goal statement for education and skills development, would like to see equal opportunities and diversified...
Opportunities. Pardon me. That just seems so subjective and very vague for me in terms of what opportunities would be defined as, but that's certainly more difficult to measure. But going back to the second question, please, are there numerical scores, datas, or quantifiable ways to measure these things you talked about as an example of one pillar, just to use it as an example across the budget?
Sure. So for most of the indicators in this framework, we do have data available from a number of sources. I will give you an example. Under the gender-based violence pillar, we have indicators related to self-reported incidents of violent crime. We have indicators related to sexual assault reported to police. We certainly have that data available from Statistics Canada.
Excellent.
In terms of reduction you're hoping for?
Lisa and Steph, thank you so much. We're a little bit over the 7 minutes, so thank you very much. We're now going to move to Ms. Squash for your 7 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Et,
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for remaining here at this meeting. I had a question, indeed, concerning the strategy on the campuses. You were saying earlier, or the Minister was saying, that there is a strategy that will be rolled out, and there'll be a study over a 5-year period. So there's not really a plan for implementation right now for women and girls on campuses who are the victims of sexual assault. It was mentioned that the government might decrease transfers to universities that don't put action plans in place, but only as of 2019. So is there any chance that it might be implemented immediately in 2018? The decrease in transfers?
You're correct. It's not a strategy that's going to be implemented right away. As we stated and as the Minister stated, the idea is for us to work with our partners and the provinces, territories, organizations that work with students on campuses to determine what the best framework would be to put in place to allow us to have a strategy that would respond to some of the challenges that have been faced on university campuses. So at this point, we are just beginning. That work will begin over the summer in order to enable us to actually develop what that strategy really looks like. It has to respond to the partners that we're working with as well, because a lot of those folks have direct relationships with the students on the ground, and the students themselves play a really critical role in developing what this framework is going to look like. There's been a lot of work developed already by organizations. The idea of this whole strategy would be a framework that would be a national framework, but being able for it to be enabled at the campus level. And I think that would be something that would be put in place that would meet the needs of the students as well as the organizations that they're working in.
mais je parlais aussi des transferts qui pourraient être...
But I was talking also about the transfers that may be decreased for universities that don't put action plans into effect to help women who are the victims of violent crime. So could that happen right away?
Developing the strategy and the framework, and that's the focus of our work at Status of Women right now, is working with partners to develop the strategy and the framework.
Puis il y a eu un rapport qui a été...
And there was a report that was tabled by the Our Turn organization to demonstrate that there are a high number of universities who have programs to fight against sexual violence on campuses, but a lot of universities, Concordia, for example, that got a mark of D-. So could the government rather, take action against those universities who don't have policies and who are working really against victims and seem to be blaming them? So could the federal government act and take action against those universities? This work with the money that was allotted to the budget is to develop a strategy and a framework that would respond to the needs of students on campus and to allow organizations, universities, campuses, college campuses to have the tools that they need to be able to respond to some of the issues that they've been presented. We're familiar with the work that has been done by Our Turn. There's been a lot of great work by that organization as well as many others, provinces included, that outlines some of the things that need to be put in place, but it's not a holistic framework that we would like to see across the country. But we wouldn't work independently to have that completed. We would work with our partners to allow us to do that.
Okay.
Okay. And in fact, we were speaking earlier with the minister about the funding that was required in terms of the operational budget of community organizations working with women. And in connection with that, there's also all of the problems at the administrative level for these organizations and that they are facing. So women's groups are saying that in this regard it's really difficult because on top of that they have to participate in bids, in submissions, and so it's difficult to get the funding they need. So can you guarantee that it won't happen again? Because the basic funding for hiring staff, paying the rent, and those kinds of things, it seems to really affect, for example, organizations that are trying to find room and shelters for women. In Montérégie, there's an organization that is the only one in the whole area that comes to the assistance of women who are the victims of violent crime and sexual abuse. And so there's a 6-month waiting list because there are only 4 women who can help. And so is there some way to guarantee that these groups will no longer have to participate in these calls for tender for their basic funding?
And I completely appreciate where you're coming from in terms of working with not-for-profit organizations on the ground for many, many years, and definitely have heard the issues around administrative burden that organizations face sometimes when they're applying for projects within governments, federal, provincial, territorial. The goal that we have now is to make that process as simple as possible while maintaining the integrity and the controls that need to be put in place, but realistically making it simple for those organizations to not waste resources that they've got, very limited resources that they've got to work with the women on the ground that need their help, but to focus really on that work and not on the administration. So the streamlining of the process, the application itself, enabling them to not have to submit an application that's going to be 30 pages long, but a simple...
C'est surtout vraiment axé sur la mission de base et non pas d'appliquer.
But it mainly concerns the basic mission that these groups have, not for specific projects. So could these organizations get funding for their basic work without having to go through a call for tender?
The question raised earlier is basically around that. Is this funding related to sustainability and capacity of those organizations? Yes, that's the type of funding that will be available to them through a process. There will be a process where they would actually submit an application, but we're hoping it would be a very streamlined application.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to Eva Nessef for your 7 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je remercie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I also thank the witnesses who've come to speak to us today. And I thank you for the work that you're doing. We've found that there have been increases in the grants and contributions for Status of Women Canada. Generally speaking, does that cover the increase of operating costs for the department? Or could that generate more projects that could be funded through Status of Women? Is it tied to the increase in costs, or will you be able to fund further projects with these extra funds?
Support money that was provided through budget 2018 is essentially a doubling of the amount of grants and contributions dollars that are available to organizations. We have approximately $20 million now. The budget announced $100 million over 5 years. To enable us to provide that support to organizations. There is a small operating cost that the department, the agency takes to allow us to continue the operations, but the grand majority of that money would go to the organization. So essentially, it would allow us to potentially double the number of organizations that would be able to access funding.
De projet financier. Merci.
Thank you. Also, given the increase in operating expenses, we know that through this announcement, the Status of Women Canada becomes a full department. Could you explain to us how this will affect Status of Women's Canada's ability to fulfill its mission? And could you talk to us about a more diversified portfolio, for example?
For Status of Women, I've not been with the organization very long, but I would have to say that the ability for us to become a full department it provides us with the stability and the support that will be required to enable us to actually operate as a full department, staff available there to support those organizations that require support, as well as having a full minister, having a full deputy minister, and playing that interlocutor role with other departments is quite critical. And I think that really puts us in a good position to continue the work of Status of Women, working on the ground with organizations that need our support. In terms of additional, are you okay? Okay, if you're like you want. So at this point, we feel very strongly about this being a very positive opportunity for Status of Women.
C'est ça, nous voyons ici une augmentation de nombre de...
Here we're seeing an increase in the number of positions from 99 to 214 from 2016 to 2020. So you'll have more employees, almost double. That's right. For the 2018 budget allocations, we can see $1.9 million for a national consultation on gender equality amongst young Canadians. So can you share anything with the committee on how this will unfold? And to talk us about the objectives for that conversation, or the goals, and how you're going to manage this as a national project.
A couple of points in your question. You are correct in terms of the additional resources for Status of Women. It will increase the capacity of the organization to enable us to, as I said earlier, to work with organizations and to provide the support that's required to other departments. Having more resources going to organizations also requires resources with Status of Women to support them on the ground. We would like to play a role of enabling and working with organizations to allow them to connect with other partners, to connect with other funding sources. For us to be able to do that, it requires additional resources. So we're really happy about that. The consultation processes that you mentioned, we talked about men and boys earlier, and we talked about GBA+. We're also talking about the Youth Roundtable as well. It's another engagement process that will enable us to bring young people together. That work is underway to finalize details of what that would actually look like. But the goal is to bring young people from across the country together to understand some of the issues that they've been dealing with, to allow them to discuss amongst themselves how that would, how the work that we do could help advance the work that they see as important for Status of Women and for gender equality. But as I said, the details of that exact project and that roundtable are just in the works in terms of being finalized and developed.
Donc, cela veut...
So that would also include the education systems in all of the provinces and territories. It could be a national Canadian approach, including the provinces, but because the issue of education, if we're going to talk about the education of young boys, that would be through the schools. So that would be under provincial jurisdiction. There'll certainly be negotiations and discussions with the provinces and territories. No?
There's a forum of ministers for Status of Women that she met with in October of last year, that she'll be meeting with as well October of this coming year. So we're working closely in partnership with the provinces and territories on issues that impact both of us. There is also, not at the political level, but at the bureaucratic level, working groups that enable us to actually advance some of those working projects, including things like funding for organizations. It's an issue that the provinces face as well. And as you mentioned, some of the things that we are talking about do impact younger folks that are in the school systems. But really, it is working to it's a requirement to work together with the provinces and territories because there is some really keen interest on both parties to actually partner on a lot of these pieces of work.
Eva, you have about 10 seconds. No, it's 10 seconds.
Merci beaucoup pour le travail que vous faites.
Thank you very much for the work you do.
To round 2, we are starting off with our 5-minute round. To Rachel Harder for 5.
The current government has been criticized by the Parliamentary Budget Officer with regards to a slush fund that it has created. It's a slush fund of $7 billion that the Liberals want us to approve in Vote 40. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has raised some concerns with this because it actually removes power from the elected House. Normally, something like this, spending, would go through full scrutiny. As parliamentarians, we would have an opportunity to speak to it and to understand exactly where that spending is going. Measures would be put in place in order to measure whether or not the intent and purposes are being met. But because this $7 billion is just simply being put aside in this nice little pot full of cash for this government to use however and whenever they want, it could be used for, let's say, a limo ride or an India trip or a private island vacation. These things we've seen before, and so we could certainly see more of them in the future. Now, accountability is an essential thing. I'm wondering if you can help me understand Vote 40 and make sense of it. Your department is being allocated $24 million for the 2017 and 18 fiscal year. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about what specific programs are being funded.
So we have $10 million for the enhancement to the women's program to support a strong, sustainable women's movement. We have $5.5 million to expand the gender-based violence program under the strategy to prevent and address gender-based violence. We have $500,000 to establish a national framework to address gender-based violence at post-secondary institutions. $1.9 million to lead a national conversation on gender equality with young Canadians and host a roundtable on gender-based analysis plus. And $855,000 to develop an engagement strategy for men and boys that promotes gender equality. And finally, $5 million to implement an evidence-based policy approach to advancing gender equality guided by the gender results framework. And we cannot spend, the money on other things than that.
Okay, so here's my question then is, and to my colleague's point earlier, are there metrics being put in place in terms of whether or not these goals or objectives are being met? And if so, what are those metrics?
These amounts, they have to go through the Treasury Board approval process, and with each Treasury Board submissions, there's an annex for the gender results and a commitment from the Deputy Minister to achieve the results that are set in.
So when someone applies for this funding then, are they being held accountable with regards to whether or not they are delivering? And if so, how?
So we have departmental plans on which, or departmental results on which we have to report on our spending at year end and everything. And the estimates process is for the whole amount that Status of Women is receiving. I think Nancy wants to add to that.
I can just add a little bit in terms of when organizations apply for funding, there's a requirement in terms of what the results that they will achieve that are outlined in agreements that organizations sign. And so once an organization receives an amount of money from government, there's a process where there's an assessment, there's a review, we do monitoring based on the risk of projects. So organizations, it's really clear in the agreement that they sign what are the results that they are to achieve and what are the deliverables, and that's what project officers in our department would work with organizations to ensure are being delivered.
Okay. Specifically with regards to the $1.9 million that's going to a national conversation on gender equality with young Canadians, can you break down for me how this money will be spent in order to pull this off and what your measurables are?
At this point, as I said earlier, we're in the process of figuring out what that actual project is going to look like and how it's actually going to be achieved. There's that money would be broken down specifically, as Nick said, to be used for that specific project. It's not, we're not able to use that money for other things. It would be to enable young people to attend, to hire facilitators. It's that type of support that will be required to carry out that project.
Okay, and so would the same be true for engaging men and boys? Are there metrics there? Is there a way of measuring the results?
So just adding to my colleague's previous response, there are metrics, there are performance indicators that we commit to with every initiative. Yeah. And I think more to your point in terms of metrics, there are targets as well that are committed to in terms of those indicators.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. We're now going to go on. We're going to take our last 5 minutes with Bernadette, and then I'm going to give
my time to Pam, please.
Fantastic. And what I'm going to do is, because we'll have excess time, I'm going to give each group one question at each, just so that we can use our time efficiently. Go ahead, Pam.
Thanks, Chair. A few months ago, I held a roundtable in my riding with women entrepreneurs. Minister Chagger came down, and we had a conversation about some of the challenges that they've faced in terms of running their own business. We heard about challenges with financing. One of the things I heard about was scaling up their business. They seemed to feel they had support to start their business, but they needed some support to scale up their business. And when I saw the budget, I was really quite pleased with a number of measures that were in there that spoke directly to what those women around the table had said to me. So I wonder if you can just elaborate on some of the many measures that were in that budget that were supporting women who are running their own small business.
Thank you for the question. It is an area that I think we hear a lot in terms of women, the challenges that they face in terms of being entrepreneurs. We are working closely with our partners at ISED to actually focus on the Women Entrepreneurship Initiative and strategy that that was announced in Budget 18. Really, the focus is on, there's two pillars focusing on helping their businesses grow. So women-led business growth is really, really important, and allowing women to have the skills that they need is something that I think you heard in your roundtable and we've heard over and over again. Increasing access to capital is another area that has been a problem and an issue for women, young women starting their own business as an opportunity. And so that is something that's going to be allowed or focused on through ISED, through BDC. Innovation is another area. So the third pillar is on improving access to federal business innovation programming, and really looking at how underrepresented groups are accessing this is something that's really important. And we've heard also that it is an area where Indigenous women, in terms of entrepreneurship, that's an area of draw for them, because it allows not only Indigenous women but women generally to do that balance between family and so third area. And data and knowledge is the fourth area, the fourth pillar that they're focusing on, that will allow women to basically have access to best practices and share data to enable them to succeed in starting of their businesses. So we're looking forward to that work with them.
I wonder if you could, I know there was specific in there about the Business Development Bank and some of the things that they're doing. Do you have any information on that? Because that's something, I mean, we had testimony at committee here where women go to get a loan and they're asked if their husband can co-sign for them. So it's certainly been a challenge for women to obtain that financing in the first place.
It's something that it's definitely one of the pillars in terms of increasing access to capital, and BDC providing $1.4 billion in financing, which is it's the first of its kind, and increasing the Women in Technology Fund to $2 million, up from $70 million. So both of those pieces and measures are things that would enable women to have a larger access to the capital. It's not only the access to the capital, like you said, though, it's the supports that women need around that, and that's in terms of the first pillar of that strategy is helping the women allow their business to grow, and to sort of try to break down those barriers that they face accessing the supports and the capital that they need to start their businesses.
And there was also, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it, but there was also something in the budget for women who are running a small business to be able to share best practices and have sort of a boot camp for entrepreneurs. Maybe that is what it was called, but that's something along those lines, so that to be able to get the access to the expertise that's out there.
And I believe that's the fourth pillar of their strategy in terms of accessing best practices and data. And they're in the process of developing that strategy at this point to see how that would work. But it is access to a boot camp. There are a lot of measures that are available, I think, across the country to varying degrees. And their hope is to actually elevate that level of expertise and information to enable all women to have access to that type of support.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it, Chair.
It is. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do, because we have votes today, so some people, we do have a vote. We're voting on vote 1 and 5 when it comes to the main estimates. So that's what we're voting on today. There you go, Bernadette. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow one member from each party to ask one question. I would like to stay within a minute and a half question and answer. So Ms. Quash, we're going to start with you. You have 90 seconds for one question with one answer.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Alors,
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we learned that in the budget there will be indicators or indications of the criteria for the allocation of grants and contributions or subsidies to community groups, but the Cabinet has not yet approved the criteria. So it's a little difficult for community organizations to plan because now, do you know if the Cabinet is going to approve those criteria before the end of June so that by the beginning of September these organizations will be able to know what they are?
Say yes or no to that question. We'll be prepared as a department to implement the strategy to allow the money to go out the door as soon as possible.
mais comment ça se fait que le cabinet n'a pas encore...
No, but how is it that the Cabinet has not yet approved these criteria if it's in the budget?
In terms of $20 million a year for 5 years to allow us to support sustainability of women's organizations. Those are very broad statements, so what Cabinet will approve would be more details around how that would work.
Thank you very much, Ms. Quash. I'm now going to move over to Stephanie Kusi for your 90 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Beyond the harassment cases that I mentioned earlier today on the other side of the House, I think it's very unfortunate that we've seen an incredible amount of disrespect towards our chair today. And I do note that a large envelope of the funding has been put towards engaging men and boys to promote gender equality. So my question is this. How much of this $24 million will be allocated to educating the men and the boys of the Liberal caucus? Thank you.
Yeah. So there's budget 2018 proposes to invest 1.8 million over 2 years, starting in 2018-19, to develop an engagement strategy for men and boys that promotes equality and pilots innovative, targeted approaches to addressing inequality.
Thank you.
Mark Saray, you have 90 seconds question and answer within.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is in terms of these statistics. We heard in several other committees that there is a lack of statistics. There's a great, in a great variety of places. So where does the department go to find its statistics? Should Statistics Canada have more funding to do more work? So I would just like a comment on the kind of statistics that we should be able to get a hold of.
quite frequently what you just noted, that the statistics don't exist. And in many cases, the statistics do exist. Folks just don't know where to access those statistics, for example, to do a GBA+. So one of the things committed to in the budget is to implement initiatives to enhance access to those statistics. So there was money in the budget to Statistics Canada to establish a new centre for gender diversity and inclusion statistics so that they can increase that access to statistics that would be relevant related to gender equality, diversity and inclusion more broadly.
Shall vote one under the office. Thank you very much. And I'd really like to thank today's panelists for coming and providing us that intel on everything that's going on in the department. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the votes. We need to vote on 1 and 5 today. So pursuant to Standing Order 81-4, the main estimates for the fiscal year of 2018-19, shall vote 1 under the office of the coordinator carry? Shall it carry? Yeah, all those in favor? All those not in favor? Okay, on division. Okay, and shall vote 5 under the office of the coordinator carry? Not carried yet, it's yays. Yays? Nays? Okay, on division. Okay, so following on next meeting will be, shall I report the votes on the main estimates to the House on these votes? Yes? Okay, fantastic. The next meeting, do we not have a meeting Tuesday?
Yeah, it's Tuesday.
Oh, Tuesday, golly gee. The next meeting is going to be on Tuesday. We're going to be continuing with the consideration of the draft. The analyst has sent out more information to you, so everybody should have everything for working on Tuesday. Thank you very much. Today's meeting is adjourned.